You hear a lot of screaming? Is it just me? Computer fans? Oh, that's definitely me. Hey, it's Ryan Run's thing that I do because there's no because, but it's one of them. And this week, I know I said that it might be about Contra, one of my favorite games of all time. And I said that because these past few, what are we on? I guess this is the fourth one, right? So maybe we can do away with some of the pleasantries here at the beginning. I know I said that I was also looking into stuff that I could play with my family over this quarantine time as it's been. And most of the shows I feel like have been focused on that, although maybe indirectly at times. I know I wanted to get more into the experiential with some of the others where I kind of dropped off, because I'm also having a lot of fun just going back and looking stuff up on these games, the history of them and stuff like that. This week, not that there's going to be less of that, but they're all newer games, so maybe there's less to be had. Who knows? This show should be done again in 20 years, where I'm sure every single one of these games has fallen into such classic categories as Streets of Rage and whatever else the other shows were about. It's been several weeks now. It's been months, probably even. Speaking of which, it's been several weeks since I did one of these because I got called back to work. So let's just hope that doesn't happen again. And one of these can happen again. So here I am again. You might hear my computer fan, you might hear my squeaky chair, and you'll definitely hear me talking about some games that I've found to play with my family more than anything. Like I said, during these uncertain times where we're certainly in the house together, several feet apart from one another. So while that's the case, this particular story, as it unfolds, actually took place possibly last year. If you tuned into the Zero Hit Points show we did before, we had our favorite fives at the end of the year, which, what do I do now? I guess I can still have a favorite 5 games of the year alone. But one of those games, and like I said, I think last year, was called Yoku's Island Express. And if I did a bad job of explaining what it was then, it's probably not going to get much better now. But it was one of my top games of that year, not including the year it came out, 2018. So I think I was probably a year late on it, which is actually pretty good for me. Speaking of which, in this show, 2 games from 2020. I'm telling you, I'm getting better or worse. And Yoku's Island Express, so named because you, being Yoku, and are put in charge of the Island Express so very soon in the game. You become a postmaster, or I can't remember if that's the end game. I think you want to become the postmaster general. If not, that's a cool term. And it's essentially a pinball platformer, which I guess there's been a few of these as of late. I feel like there was a little resurgence in pinball not that far from home. Obviously, one of the shows we did was very pinball focused, and I even went around town looking for pinball games, like where they are holed up, because in even this small town, I want to say there was maybe 2. So Yoku's Island Express has the distinction of being both a pinball game and a platformer, which you can really see how those two would marry pretty easily, and it's done beautifully here. The only complaint I had, if you listen to that show, was that maybe the pinball, since it is taking on that island aesthetic, all the tables are island themed, you're dealing with earth and grass and stuff like that, and it made it feel a bit mushy. I don't even know if it actually was, or if that's just how it translated. In the end, it didn't matter. Not like you lost any control over the table, over, as much as you can over pinball as it is, which, if you're into pinball, you're into frustration at one point or the other, because it's the ball. Why doesn't it go there? It's not doing it. It should just, but it doesn't. So Yoku's has that, because every pinball game has that, but it doesn't matter. It's a fantastic game. Besides, it's so incredibly charming, just how it's designed, both how the tables are worked into the overall map, how you're traversing that map. You're essentially this little, I think you are a dung beetle, actually. That's not making a joke. with attached permanently to this pinball rock that you're pushing around the levels, and then you dunk it into different pinball tables that are built in, and you're completing different tasks there. It's just super cool, man. That game, I'm like I said, happy to talk about it again. Go check it out. But Yoku's Island Express is a single player game. Again, talking multiplayer games here, stuff you can play with your family if you like them. And when I actually got down to looking for those games, again, I'm combing Game Pass for a lot of this, Xbox Game Pass. Actually, this might have been a Games with Gold. Either way, I didn't pay money for it because that's also who I am. Overcooked was a game that I found. And again, extremely late on this. This came out a year before Yoku's Island Express, even 2017. And if I didn't mention it, Yoku's Island Express was the first game from Villa Gorilla Games, or Villa Gorilla. And Overcooked is the first game from Ghost Town Games. So there's going to be a little bit of a theme. And again, we'll get to what this whole show is actually about shortly, I'm sure. But Overcooked is a game about cooperation. You are in, I think it goes up to 4 players. Again, we're just talking my daughter and my wife here, so we're maxing out at 3. And you work in a kitchen. You're tasked with recipes and getting them out depending on the level within a certain amount of time. Each recipe will expire after a certain amount of time, but also you're trying to get your score up to before the overall timer is out. To do that, it's got a star system, 1, 2, 3. So we find this game, and it is just beautifully built around multiplayer. The level design, some of the ways it's parsed out means that you can only do certain tasks. Sometimes you can't get to both sides of the board. Sometimes tasks are crisscrossed, so you're learning how to switch tasks on the fly between teammates and stuff like that. Honestly, there's a number of ways you can tackle each one. Towards the end, when you really have to get down to, if you're going for those 3 stars, it gets, to me, it seems like it gets a little more narrow. Like, you got to do it a certain way or it just doesn't get done. It's just one of those games that has such a great idea, such a basic idea, and manages to still execute on it really well. Phil Duncan, so I start looking stuff up, and co-founder Phil Duncan says, quote, "Kitchens have always struck me as a perfect analogy for a cooperative game, an occupation where teamwork, time management, spatial awareness, and shouting are all vitally important." So it nails all of those things. But that very last one, shouting, is not in the game. So it doesn't so much nail that as elicit it perfectly from every single player. And trust me, my wife, and my daughter have never been so mean to each other. So he knew, Phil Duncan, he really did know that he could ruin a family if he really wanted to. In fact, at one point, we toyed with streaming some games. If you're friends with me on Facebook, you can be. I don't recommend it, but we put up some games there, especially during quarantine. We're like, hey, come hang out, whatever. And at some point, I forget if it was my wife or my daughter, said, hey, maybe we should stream Overcooked. And I said, maybe we should keep our friends, because honestly, it's just, why are they standing there doing nothing? We have to complete the kitchen. And I'm not going to pretend like it's not me. It's mostly me. So here's the thing. You're going for the 3 stars, and obviously this is going to require a certain amount of finesse and multitasking. The whole game does, but it's to the nth degree when you're going for that 3rd star. And honestly, this is where I think the game fails the most. And again, wonderful game, but there is a point with the difficulty curve when you're trying to get to 3 stars where 3 players isn't tenable anymore. And my wife isn't bad at the game. Like, we all did great. And for most of these, we could get the 3 stars, but there would be some maps where it felt like it just wasn't tweaked enough. And maybe I should be looking up videos online. I don't know. But there were maps where 2 people was the way to go. And actually, I've read, maybe I did go look up some guides on this one. Oh no, it's when I was researching if I wanted to play the game in the first place. Like, what is this thing? And I've seen other people say that, 2 players is kind of the sweet spot. And sure enough, there was a map where we just could not get that 3 stars with those 3 people, because the goal score changes based on the number of people that are playing. I also read some people saying that one person was the way to go, and I tried that, and it does not seem like the way to go ever. But Overcooked is worth it. I don't care. Play Overcooked. Lucky for us, we came to the game so late that the sequel had already been out for 2 years. So 2018, Overcooked 2. And honestly, Overcooked 2 is everything you want a sequel to be. Everything is better. The art and animations, the game looks gorgeous. The controls feel just a little tighter. I couldn't tell you if they were actually, or again, maybe this is just that relationship between how the game looks and how it feels in your hands. It goes a long way. I mean, that's what a game is, right? Or a video game, I guess. The mechanics are more fleshed out. They've introduced throwing. You can throw ingredients across the room or whatever. You know, they're still smart about the level design and that you can't throw it to some areas that you can. Some levels are very obviously set up to have you throwing ingredients. They have some levels where you're controlling a platform around the place. They introduce a ton of new stuff that never feels gimmicky or overdone, because that's saying something for this game. Honestly, you are doing a ton all the time. It's extremely hectic. You're working on different recipes at different times, maybe between different people. Again, it depends on the map. It depends on how, I think a lot of times the players, obviously, because you might be stronger at a skill or easier for you to wrap your head around it than other things. So however the levels shook out, it just seemed very smartly designed around cooperation. Again, obviously. And they fixed the difficulty curve. For this entire game, it was all three of us working towards 3 stars, and we never felt like it was impossible. We never felt like we had to drop a teammate to drop the score to make it more achievable. There are some levels towards the end, and they also figured out DLC for Overcooked 2, and I would recommend buying every single one of them. But I think at the end of the main game, and they did it for each, at the end of each DLC, there are these multi-tier levels where you're starting on some recipes and in the middle of cooking, and the level will shift in some way. I think the first one had rafts of some sort, so you have to grab the food, take off to the side, the thing shifts around, and then you move back. Not only were those extremely hard, which finale okay, although still kind of a steep curve, it just seemed like a cheap way to add difficulty. Maybe I'm still angry, I don't know, because I'm telling you, those are rough. Let's just say the shouting did not get any better for Overcooked 2, or it got extremely better for Overcooked 2. In any event, still, I could tell they knew something was wrong with the difficulty curve in the last game, and this is very much more multiplayer friendly, even more multiplayer friendly. You know, most multiplayer games scale in the way that, yes, you might get a little harder if you add more people to it, and I think that's smart. Obviously, you don't always want to steamroll, but I think there's a balance between adding people and making it easier. You know, you don't want to make it, it's never a one-to-one, essentially. You want to make it a little bit harder, so you're not steamrolling, but not, what is that, exponential? No, it's not exponential. It's the opposite of exponential. Logarithmic? No, it's because of the math and when the numbers for that. So just look. And Overcooked 2 gets it. So by this point, if we were hooked on Overcooked 1, like Overcooked 2, we're over the moon. Again, every single night we're just keeping going, which we just kept going from Overcooked 1. So they're just good games, man. Overcooked 2 is a good game. We're playing some of the DLC and free content. In fact, I feel like there might have been some dropped recently, because once we got everything, we stopped playing for a little bit. So I guess we're not great fans, but when we logged back in to capture some of this footage, I even had my family capture it with me, so you'll see some multiplayer action in that footage. I want to say there was a new content pack, so and free too. Like, I bought all the paid stuff, but I think they're still dropping free stuff. In any event, worth it, free or not. So again, rabidly seeking this Overcooked experience, chasing the Overcooked high, I go back to Game Pass and come upon a game called Moving Out. And this is one of the ones that came out in 2020. It's from DevM Games, this isn't their first game. They've already made some game called Extreme Forklifting, so you know I love them already. And SMG Studio, which made Death Squared, which I have also played at this point. It was another game that we picked up as a family to play, but I don't think I'm going to talk about it for this show. I think I might have a garbage show. I might have several garbage shows. I might have had 4 already, where I kind of just, these are all related in a way that you'll see. I have a bunch of scraggler games that aren't necessarily related, other than they're stuff we tried to play as a family and or did succeed. In any event, Moving Out is a game where you are movers. You are, I forget, it's FART is the acronym. And you are part of this team tasked with going to different houses, places, environments, and moving a bunch of the furniture into the moving truck. So it starts out pretty simply. The first house, it's just a suburban home and you're moving stuff out. But it's one of those games where everything's bonkers, right? You're crashing through windows, you're throwing chairs outdoors, you're breaking everything off their hinges, you're running ragged throughout all the house and knocking stuff over. And it's fantastic. Like that aspect of it, obviously, I feel like somebody had a vision and nailed it. It's super fun to watch, especially for that first few games. You know, spoiler alert, it's not as tight as Overcooked. You know, this scratched some of the itch, but not all of it. And to be fair, again, I'm very high on Overcooked, so it may be unfair to Moving Out. But Moving Out nails an aesthetic and a type of movement that isn't necessarily that, you know, simulator type. It's just a very sloppy, directed sloppiness, right? That creates comedy in both what you're doing and how you're playing. So we had a lot of fun with it, and it's worth playing. Maybe tellingly, the thing I liked the most about it were the accessibility options, because we tried to play it at first just kind of default, and I think it was asking for a bit of technicality or precision that the game itself might not have been up to. Don't quote me on that or anything, but because we very soon turned on the accessibility options just so we could have fun and kind of run rampant through the levels. And it was still fun. Like, it wasn't so easy that it became boring or monotonous. And maybe because of the accessibility options, it didn't overstay its welcome. You know, it's because it didn't, I feel like, have as much to offer in the way of tight gameplay like Overcooked. It's probably better that I didn't sit there banging my head against the wall or furniture until we 3-starred everything, which I believe it has a 3-star system. I forget how you're scored. In any event, this is where my Overcooked, what would you call that, addiction has reached new heights. I've combed the entirety of Game Pass. You know, I'm even considering spending money on games at this point. It's crazy. And something clicks that at the beginning of each one of these games, and that's why I started with Yoku's Island Express. And yes, it took 4 games, 4 games. But there's a logo that pops up at each and every one of these that says Team 17. So basically, I go to Team 17 and I just start looking for games that they've made. But also, I go to the Wikipedia and I start looking up where the heck these guys came from. And okay, they're a publisher. So, for the most part, they're a little bit all over the map, which I think that makes for a better publisher, obviously, if you're doing some development also, or if you come from developers, which it seems like they did. But in the end, it's a lot of, you know, businessy stuff and stories about how a company got founded, which can be interesting. And honestly, I did read the whole thing, but I don't necessarily want to spend a ton of time on that. But honestly, if you're into that type of thing, go check it out. There's some interesting tidbits in there. A few of the things I learned is that they're based in Britain. Nottingham is not just a fake location from Robin Hood. and they've been around since 1990. Apparently, they were responsible for half of all Amiga game sales at one point, and this was not good news to the proprietors of Amiga Power, think Nintendo Power magazine, who I guess gave enough bad reviews that they developed a rivalry, turned hostility, it seems, at some point. Team 17 started putting digs at the staff members in some of their games, and I think it might have actually resulted in a lawsuit at some point. Again, not going to say it's not interesting, but maybe we don't need to spend time on it. We can start at a game called Worms. And if you haven't been down the artillery rabbit hole, if you've made it this far in your life without being down the artillery rabbit hole, maybe just don't. Andy Davidson is someone who did, to the point where he made artillery for the Amiga in '94. I think I played an artillery game on an Apple II in middle school. And again, I don't know which one that was, because it's one of those games that seems like nobody copyrighted it to some extent, so everybody's got one somewhere, somehow. Andy Davidson did that one for the Amiga, and then came back with Worms, a clone of sorts with, a skin of worms, with a wormy skin, in 1994. And Team 17 teamed up with him. It put them on the map to the tune of 16 games in 15 years, I think. So I played just Worms. Again, I don't even know where that falls into this, but I played it in 2009 on my 360. Maybe you played Worms, Worms the Director's Cut, Worms 2, Worms Armageddon, Worms World Party, Worms 3D, Worms Forts Under Siege, Worms 4, Mayhem, Worms Open Warfare, Worms Open Warfare 2, Worms, Worms A Space Oddity, Worms 2, Armageddon. How's Worms 2 coming out? Just Worms Reloaded, Worms Battle Islands. And that's if you don't count online Worms, Worms Blast, Worms Golf, Worms Crazy Golf. So apparently the first game put them on the map enough. In fact, I want to say saved Team 17. I don't know if they were in such dire straits, but Worms did the deed, and Team 17 never forgot about it. But the Team 17 I'm seeing, and that we're talking about this show, if we were talking about that, wow, have I spent that long on this already? It seems to be the Team 17 of 2010 and onward. They apparently took a new tack. They decided that while the Worms thing was doing fine for them, they wanted to branch out in more indie development, which I don't know if that means Worms was a AAA or if that's just how they viewed it. And also, that's if you're not counting Worms Ultimate Mayhem, Worms Revolution, Worms Clan Wars, Worms 3, Worms Battlegrounds. Again, we're back to 3. Worms 4 mobile, Worms WMD, Worms Rumble, which came out after 2010. The game that apparently re-put them on the map, maybe this time around, is the one that I've heard about more often than not in these most recent years, is called The Escapists. Never played it. I don't even know what type of game it is, but it did show up in this final game. Again, like I said, I go to Team 17. I start looking at the games they've put out because they've got a fantastic track record with me at this point. So I just, what are they looking at? I want to look at it too. And this next game had an Escapists map in it. The game is called Golf with Your Friends, another 2020 game. This is the other one. And it's put out by a developer called Blacklight Interactive, which just sounds like a developer when tasked with putting out a game wherein you golf with your friends. They decide to name it Golf with Your Friends. Not even golf with friends, but golf with your friends. Like, these are where the friends are from. They're yours. This is then golf with them, yours, friends. Do you remember 3D mini golf from the Xbox 360? I do. I remember downloading that game and somehow having fun with it. In fact, I want to say we tried to go back to it fairly recently. Again, we're also getting into the back catalog here, trying to find games to play with each other as a family. And Golf with your friends has a few things in common with that game, with that mini golf game. These are both mini golf games, in that it's never the tightest controls you want, but they appear to understand that if you just make a competent enough game about miniature golf, you're going to have some fun. So your mileage may vary. Honestly, I think it's still fun. I think we still had a lot of fun with it. And you know, maybe I'm not a developer. No, I'm definitely not a developer, but maybe this has more to do with golf games in general. Like, what more is there to a golf game? You know, this very innovatively doesn't even have the controls where you just hold down the button and release it to hit. You know, you're setting your power with the left stick, and then so maybe it's the next level of miniature golf game. I don't know. I think it's perfectly serviceable and maybe better than that. And again, it's still on Game Pass, so it's a good game. Golf with your friends. Do you have friends? Golf with them. They're yours. The friends. We had a ton of fun with it. We played through all the maps. It's also extremely customizable. Like, if the controls don't quite feel like a Tiger Woods, which I don't think I've ever played a Tiger Woods, but I assume... Wait, they don't make those anymore, do they? Hey, I assume like one of them EA golf games or 2K, if they make one, probably feel pretty tight, at least at some point during the franchise. I don't know. Even if it doesn't feel like that, it's got like Rocket League, probably even more options than Rocket League, amount of capabilities. You can choose different game types. They have like basketball, hockey. You can choose different rotating ball shapes if you really want to screw with each other. We played a couple games like that, and it was just maddening because each hole your ball turns into a different shape. And it's not that it looks like a different shape and still rolls like a ball. It's that it behaves completely unpredictably like a cone or football or cheeseburger. It's not a cheeseburger. I forget what the different shapes are. But you can put a cheeseburger. There's hats too. You can put a cheeseburger. If you've seen some of the footage, I think my ball had a cheeseburger on it. And that's where we're at this point. Enjoyed all of those games to some extent. I'd probably still, okay. If we're making this still the multiplayer thing, it's Overcooked by a mile. I would put Overcooked neck and neck with Yoku's Island Express if you've got to play something. So there you go. You got a single player and a multiplayer option. Maybe still chasing that Overcooked high, but not for long, because whenever I hear somebody complain that the new Xbox doesn't have any games for it, I say Overcooked. My friends, Overcooked All You Can Eat Edition, it appears, is coming out, and it's got the first game and the second game and a bunch of DLC, and I think it's got additional stuff. I don't care. I'm going to get it anyways. Also, even if they just have tweaked that first game enough, you know, maybe they're using the Overcooked 2 engine, which I'm not even that savvy about games. I don't know if that's how engines work. But if Overcooked 1, but Overcooked 2, I'm already sold. I would buy that on its own. So probably come back for some of that. I'll be talking about it then. Also, I've got stuff to talk about, but maybe too much stuff to talk about. So, hey, if you care what these things are about, let me know. I've got Jedi Fallen Order on the mind. I've got Spec Ops The Line on the and Death Squared I talked about. I think that's going to make, again, the garbage show where I just wrap up all the family games I've been playing. Asura's Wrath, I don't care what you say, that show's coming anyways. And Trine have been actually the big ones lately. Those would be interesting as well. So if you care about any of those more than another, let me know somewhere, somehow. I'm still at zerohitpoints.com. You can even find me, Ryan, at zerohitpoints.com. Also, we still do book club for movies. Still also on zerohitpoints.com, although bookclubformovies.com works as well. So come check any of those out. Okay, bye.